The society of which side-opening government seeks to defend is a society where people are actively making a moral judgment against a specific incident or an act of the person or group of person or people. This is particularly a trend in real society as well, given the advancement of social networking services, which individuals are informed about the variety of social issues and variety of incidents, where people are actively making a demonstration and or making remarks in Twitter, Facebook, etc., and active discourse is created at mass media and newspaper agency as well. We would defend a society where this code of public opinion to one without, because opening government believes in two key premises in advancing our case. First and foremost, judgment which people naturally going to have on that side of the house should be visualized and expressed is better than the judgment to be hidden. Secondly, active moral discourse in public improves people to inform and consider political moral decision. Given these two key points standing from Prime Minister, first and foremost, I'm going to explain to you how the opinion being hidden is more harmful when we analyze the degree of strength or marginalization of disadvantaged group, or the definition of the paradigm of opposition. Second, we'll talk about how our policy improves the society on the basis of achieving an inclusive society on the basis of reasoned discourse. So, model as well as the complement of the society are as follows. We're able to allow a defamation law, for example, to average individuals as well as celebrities, even when they are accused of false information or a lie. That's not a preferable, active code of public opinion in which the side opposition, side government is going to defend on our side of the house. But primarily, the active code of public opinion refers to the criticism against immoral law, active criticism against the immoral act of particular individual or immoral act on the basis of the group of people who operate some random so-called bad things within our society. Is there any of the clarification of the question with regards to contextualization of the model? Very clear. So, degree of marginalization, which is the worst case of the opposition. The worst case scenario in which opposition must agree and defend is that given some people react to individual, social act, custom, or group or nature of individuals being necessarily foment their moral discontent, even on that side of the house, it is preferable for us to have that discontent to be open, visualized, and expressed, and being able to have discourse rather than being hidden. For instance, many conservative people in any countries maybe is in fact going against immorally discontent against homosexuality, for instance, without those conservative ideas not being contested, without contested by conservative people making a remark that homosexuality is something bad, disgusting for me, etc. But there's no discourse, if there's less active discourse as well as an opinion being expressed by those people. The outcome in which we morally regret and abhor on our side of the house is a kind of backlash more than words. The kind of backlash which is the physical manifestation of the demonization, which is the atrocity of which we recognize as the killing bar, as LGBT bar in the United States, America. But furthermore, the kind of atrocity which made Narimia, for instance, to be ostracized in the TV show, etc. The kind of marginalization is harsher because there's no chance for those people's mindset as well as the way of thinking to be countered by our society without active discourse. Yes, Shin.
So I understand discourse is important. Please explain what kind of unique discourse you can achieve by actively punishing these kind of people.
The kind of things which people making a moral discontent to a particular person, particular incident, particular custom. So I don't see specific uniqueness associated with the way of expression, because the ways of expression can be varied in many ways. Twitter, face-to-face communication, mass media debate, etc. I don't see how the POI is relevant and being strong to opposition case. The thing is that, ladies and gentlemen, the active so the thing is that, and furthermore we will analyze, when people are not contested of their ideas will be strengthened further and further because of confirmation biases to their society, as well as the group discussion within a specific group of people. For example, misogynistic remark should be strengthened when there's a constant discourse or kind of reality, as well as the common sense, for instance, is generated within the particular perspective in specific community. We think because society, that the kind of expression and sort of moral discontent is now open to the society, we will have more chance in engagement, more chance in the ways in which they have to re-justify their thinking, and we think it's particularly important to have no violence, no people being died on that side of the house. That's the first comparative. The second comparative, no thanks, is the reason discourse in inclusivity. When we look at its history reports the minority group or disadvantaged group advanced society in either two ways. First, disadvantaged group of people had effectively countered the cult of public opinion. In the past, the LGBT group of people was considered to be a disease. LGBT group of people effectively counter that, the kind of discrimination, as well as the perception, marginalization of the wrong reasons to discriminate people, the wrong reason to label people. LGBT group of people, because are able to counter back with the reason discourse. I am human being, equality of human beings is important. We stand, if you're a real American, you have to respect human equality. That's how discrimination is something bad. Racial inequality, as well as gender inequality, as well as sexual inequality, had already tackled with this process. But secondly, disadvantaged group of people making active call of public opinion against people who make immense misogynistic remarks, etc. Female problem, female marginalization, or disadvantaged, perception being politicized immensely when, like Suzuki Muneo, for example, characterized female as baby carriers, for example, or it is natural and should be a female's jobs to engage in child care, etc. That misogynistic remark was effectively countered by feminist discourse in the sense that feminists are able to do an active call to public opinion against the immoral act of the social custom associated with a specific community. What are we showing today? We are showing first and foremost two key comparatives. First and foremost, we have shown you a lack of discourse leads to violence, people being died. That's damaging. Secondly, people who are disenfranchised, marginalized, and discriminated were able to counter back to the kind of discourse with the reason discourse, but furthermore, making a public call to opinion makes inclusivity and as well as social advancement. I'm supremely proud to propose this policy.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your remarks. Next, we'd like to invite leader logician Sayaka Nakano.
Mr. Speaker, Fujita-san did a very good job at showing why discourse is good for society, right? And basically their whole case is the idea that discourse is good. What they need to show you from opening government is why constantly bashing poor Becky on Twitter, bashing her on the news, saying she's a bad person, saying she's shit, just because of the fact that she committed adultery is something that is good for society, and it's something that is effective for society. And furthermore, why at the place of this one individual who should be treated just the same as the rest of us, why this is something legitimate, and because of the fact that they have not been able to do that, but only have defended discourse, we think that they're already losing this debate. So we're going to talk about two main things coming from leader of opposition. We're first going to talk about the main actor of this debate, which is basically Becky or Bukati, and like how it's basically unjust or unfair for this person. And we're going to do this in a very simple way by comparing it to the criminal court as to why it's considered fair, right? And secondly, we're going to talk about more about why this desensitizes society to more harmful things, those kinds of things, right? So before that, let's go on to one kind of form of rebuttal to Fujita-san, right? So basically he said that discourse is good. That was his only point. So first of all, you have to consider what kind of discourse this exactly is, right? Because we think a discourse is good when that person who is being, for example, bashed on can actually speak out against those things and actually has an equal level ground. That's why we ban things like hate speech, right? Because it's oftentimes unfair, right? In that same way, what's happening in this, for example, discourse is the idea is one form of bashing over and over condemn, right? Therefore, we think that there's no meaningful thing that comes out of this kind of discourse. But furthermore, all that happens is that Vicky gets hurt, right? So let's go on to why it's fundamentally unfair that this court, no. So this whole like court of public whatever is basically fundamentally unfair, right? We think it's unfair on four main principles. First of all, the fact that it's a disproportional harm, right? So currently right now, the court system of, for example, the civil court is considered very fair because of the fact that there are many like mitigating factors going in there. It's oftentimes very like, so actually like what kind of punishment you get as to what kind of wrongdoing that you do, right? However, what happens in this case is that something that isn't even deemed as a wrong in society, like as a consensus, things like lying, things like cheating, things like, for example, adultery happen, and then this person is disproportionately harmed immensely because of this one act that they did, right? So Vicky not only was like shamed by society, she first of all lost a lot of position in her job. She wasn't able to go out into society. You basically cage her into her home in the same way that you cage someone into prison, right? For something that isn't even considered a bad in our constitution, that isn't considered an absolute bad in our society. Therefore, it is a very disproportional harm to Vicky, and Vicky is super kawaiso, okay? So like secondly, it's the idea of the fact that you can actually foresee what is a good or a bad, and furthermore, you know how much harm is going to come upon it, right? So because of the fact that we have like previous law system, we have previous criminal court cases, you are able to see that, oh, if I murder something, that's pretty bad, right? Like I'm not going to be able to do stuff. So because of that, we think that you can actually foresee the amount of blame that goes on you. However, in these cases, there is no foreseeability, and you get blamed for something that you didn't even know actively that may be seen as a harm anyway, and we think that it's morally abhorrent, right? But thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, mind you, in for example, a criminal court system, there is always going to be a lawyer for you. There is always going to be someone who defends you, right? Unfortunately, but there's also a burden of proof that is favorable for that defendant. Now, look at the court of, for example, public opinion. There is no almighty lawyer that will protect you against the public unless Tominaga-san eventually becomes that, right? So we think that because of that, that defendant, that Becky, does not have anyone who's ever going to defend her in any way, right? Therefore, it's unfair for her to get bashing continuously over and over and not even have someone be like, okay, maybe a tiny minority of people say, maybe Becky is a good person. We think that's fundamentally unfair. Close it.
So why do you assume that courts of public opinion are always one-sided and never have both opinions coinciding on this?
It's a lot easier to bash someone like a public figure than it is to actually stand up for them, right? But furthermore, if you look at the case of, for example, Obogati and things like Becky, basically, it's basically bashing over and over. But furthermore, when we see someone who has done something bad, to make ourselves feel better, we often bash upon that person over and over because somehow that makes our egos feel better, right? So we think that basically, human nature-wise, it's easier to bash these kinds of people, especially on Twitter, where people are super moriyagacha. So, fourthly, it's the idea of the fact that oftentimes it's not based on true things, right? So if you look at, for example, the criminal court and things like judges, they have to actually assess that kind of evidence, make sure that it's actually factual, and go through this really long process after actually entering that evidence into trial, and then upon that, decide that punishment of that person. But if you look at things like the baseball person, it's not even based on blurred, it's not even based on true facts, but things that are blurred, things that are ambiguous, are actively used to actually punish that person to make sure that he cannot get his job back, that he cannot come out into society without people going, oh my god, he's a drug person, right? So in that way, we think that in this court of public opinion, oftentimes things like the media, things like tabloids and things like that, pick up on these things that aren't even proven to be true yet, and use them to actually stigmatize the society against that person and make them actually be punished for something that they may not even have done, right? And we think that is absolutely terrible and unfair. They need to prove to us why at the cost of this person, not even foreseeing this punishment, why it's okay for that person to be unjustly punished and unproportionately punished. But secondly, Tominaga-san will extend upon this, but why does this create a society that's very bad, right? So first of all, we think people who have done the same thing as these celebrities, if you did commit adultery, it's very easy for people to pick up upon these things that Becky did and automatically apply apply it to your situation and say that just because Becky did it for that reason, you should do it for the same as well, right? We think that because of that, people who committed things like adultery are going to be accused wrongly of things that they have not been done, and through that we marginalize more and more society just because Twitter-が盛り上がっちゃった. So we think that that is actually very bad, right? But furthermore, we think that if there's a lot of bashing towards Becky on, for example, the Twitter, and then you see that as a person, you see that as a child, then it's going to actually desensitize you to cyberbullying even more and more, make you seem as though it's okay to bash people, and that's what leads to cyberbullying, that's what leads to bullying within these children in, like, for example, schools. And because of the fact that it's unfair to Becky and Obokati, but furthermore, we think that it's like basically bad for society, we're very happy to oppose.
Thanks, leader opposition, for your remarks. Next, we'd like to call upon Deputy Prime Minister Alex Taylor.
The only idea that opening opposition brought us in their 7 minutes was that celebrities have an absolute right not to be criticised, an absolute right not to be offended, or if there is a point at which criticism is okay, you need to tell us what the threshold is. Am I allowed to say, I don't necessarily like Becky's fashion sense, or because that hurts her feelings, is that something that I must therefore refrain from doing? We think we're going to win this debate in 2 ways. First, we're going to show how the court of public opinion makes the average person a better citizen and also makes society more cohesive. Second, we're going to try and talk about the ways in which this court of public opinion fills the gap between law and morality that exists, because one is obviously not the other, and sometimes we need to clarify why that's the case. Before that, a few points of rebuttal to the previous speaker. So first, she tells us that Becky's the same as the rest of us in society, so therefore she shouldn't be unjustly or disproportionately criticised by the public. This misses the very obvious distinction between private and public figures, right? When you're a public figure, you make a series of choices to become famous in almost every single case. You fight, you compete in the celebrity industry, and that comes with a variety of privileges in terms of financial endorsements, in terms of the natural benefits and social benefits and prestige of fame. But it also comes with certain costs. It comes with a willingness to opt into a system which you know has historically targeted and challenged those celebrities as sort of examples in the moral discourse. And you know that that's going to be a situation in which you find yourself, you opt into it anyway, you take that risk because the benefits of celebrity status are still worth it to you. She is not the same as us, and she knows she is not the same as us. The fact that she didn't come back when she was heavily criticised doesn't mean that the discourse is not functioning, right? That was Japanese entertainment industry norms that made her retreat into her little Hitler bunker. She could have responded, she chose not to. Freedom of speech exists in this country, it's just a matter of whether you as an individual want to respond. If she didn't, well that's a problem, that's a failure of the court of public opinion in this particular country that means that those sorts of conservative values get reified. We need to address that, and we want the kind of process, essentially, that allows for the adjudication with all voices heard. Freedom of speech being guaranteed is at least a good way to principally make that happen. Next, they tell us that the court of public opinion is necessarily going to cause a bashing discourse. 2 responses. First, obviously not always, there's an initial period when an issue relating to a squeaky clean image, a baseball player for example, might be quite shocking, and people aren't quite sure what to think about that. They have to clarify that, and some people will come out in favour and against and so on. Second though, if there is bashing, if 90% of the population thinks this is wrong, then maybe it's wrong. Or certainly maybe it's wrong according to the moral standards of the community, and maybe that's okay. Maybe we accept that morality is a relevant consideration in people's lives, and they want celebrities to set a positive moral example. When you take away the court of public opinion, the ability for celebrities to be moral examples for children goes away, because this is one of the only ways that the ordinary person, through the internet, through letters to newspapers, can challenge celebrities' ability to shape the way that their children perceive the world, for example. If Woody Allen married his daughter, there's no court of public opinion to discuss why that's wrong, and he's not being legally punished, the law says it's okay, that means that powerful people can get away with literally anything. One of the few mechanisms of accountability for the powerful in terms of their immoral actions that distort society and most people disagree with, is taken away in the comparison on their side. Next, they tell us that there's no precedence, so these people can't foresee the moral sanctions that will befall them, and so therefore it's not fair to them. There's a common sense morality in most members of a particular community as to what is right and what is wrong. So having an affair, for example, having 10 affairs like Tiger Woods might be wrong. What she's saying is that these celebrities uniquely have no moral beliefs themselves. They can't foresee how other people would react to the moral consequences of their actions. Finally, they say we need factual evidence to adjudicate issues of fact. If people lie, if people say that Shinzo Abe is a paedophile, they will probably be sued or even put in prison, as happened in the UK with that kind of thing. But we think freedom of speech is important, and there has to be some sort of space for these kinds of opinions to be heard. The internet's fantastic at doing that. Oh, by the way, it's not the same as hate speech either. If they're going to talk about hate speech laws, critical distinction, are designed to prevent discrimination against unchosen characteristics, so race, gender, yes, religion. The court of public opinion judges chosen actions, actions you chose to commit, like, for example, having an affair, like, for example, homosexuality, which was something, as I say, the court of public opinion helped to clarify as no longer morally wrong. So before I move on, Simon.
So you just conceded to the fact that the norms of the Japanese media industry were disproportionate to Becky and harming her. So considering the fact that these norms are created by that court of public opinion, what are the good effects of that court of public opinion?
Well, the court of public opinion can, if it's functioning properly, challenge those norms. Perhaps the fact that Becky felt incapable of coming out suggests that this is actually status quo that you're defending, that there's no, in Japan, the court of public opinion is not properly active to the extent that freedom of speech does not seem like it can be enjoyed. We think that we get it better on our side when we allow for this kind of discourse to take place. Why? Because two reasons. First off, the court of public opinion brings you closer to the fellow members of your community with which you share a country. Why? Because even if your views on a particular moral issue diverge, you have a common interest that means you're discussing the same thing. If the court of public opinion goes away, those conversations with your friends and your family about why what Tiger Woods did was wrong suddenly don't happen anymore. There's much less to talk about, which means moral beliefs of different individuals coalesce and stay the same. The only way that you change people's moral views is to have them challenged, right, by other differentiating, diverging moral views. And we have to admit that most communities are morally diverse in terms of how people think about these kinds of issues. We think it's really important not to suppress human nature, essentially, to gossip, to try and evaluate the conduct of others of their community in this way. We think it's really important to allow that to take place because it makes you feel more connected to fellow members of your community. But moreover, it makes you a better citizen of that community. Why? Judgment is really important in democracy. Being able to assess moral claims is really important because your decisions as a voter have implications for the future of that society. And that includes morality, because all people in society have moral beliefs that affect the way in which they think society should be run. But the average citizen may not be able to critically examine their own moral beliefs directly. They don't have a reading in Kant or Hegel, they haven't read what is deontology, they don't have these sort of grounding that debaters have to be able to adequately assess principally why a particular moral act is wrong. The court of public opinion, critically on our side, allows these issues to be discussed indirectly in a way that uniquely happens on our side. Why? Because people are interested in celebrities. They're not interested in Immanuel Kant. And moreover, people think one thing, but other people think another thing. That creates a process of challenge and discord, a literal discourse on the internet and other democratic public spaces that allows for that deliberative process to take place indirectly. That means that people's moral views, their beliefs, are clarified through examination of cases. So Woody Allen marries his adopted daughter. I think it's wrong. This guy says it's fine. Well, suddenly we have an argument, and at the end of it, we both have a clearer understanding of why we believe that. Why is that important? Because it means you have a clearer ability to understand and to justify your moral worldview, which means you have a stronger basis for your moral and political decisions. Because if you've heard the arguments of the other side of a particular issue, you're much more likely to understand why you think what you do. Otherwise, without the court of public opinion, these things never happen. These conversations are never challenged, and there's no sort of ideas to challenge that. So finally, the gap between law and morality. We say that certain laws are necessarily immoral, and we say that certain acts, such as Woody Allen, such as having affairs, are necessarily immoral but not illegal. We think it's necessary for the public to feel like their society is working for them, to be able, when the law fails to discharge what they consider to be a legitimate burden in terms of sanctioning someone, to do that on their behalf. And that process obviously takes place democratically as well, because it's not the case that a minority moral view is going to win that debate, right? There's always space in the internet and in the media for this to take place. That's why we think this kind of court of public opinion is such a valuable democratic tool. It's also legitimate because celebrities have opted into a culture in which they know this is going to be something that's happening to them. They know their moral actions are going to be sanctioned and questioned, and we think that's fine. So we're happy to propose. Thank you.
So, thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for your remarks. Next, we'd like to invite Deputy Leader of Opposition, Yuki Tominaga.
Alright, 3 issues from the deputy level position. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how it is unjust, which was the point made by Sayaka. And secondly, I'm going to talk about whether or not there is a necessity for the court of public opinions. And thirdly, I'm going to expand on the social effect, which was spoken by Sayaka already. First of all, let's talk about how it is unjust, because Sayaka gave us 4 layers of analysis as to how that is unjust. And the response, the primary response coming from the Deputy Prime Minister, is to say that public figures have differential have differential burdens compared to the private individuals, and therefore they should be subject to any sort of criticism, any sort of shame, and so on and so forth. But Mr. Speaker, the nuance which Sayaka gave you is that the punishment which is given by the court of public opinion is disproportionate, and that is the reason why, although we accept that there might be some differential burdens or different situations between the private individuals and public figures, the punishment that is given by the court of public opinion is something unconscionable, Mr. Speaker. So let me explain, Mr. Speaker. So in the case of adultery, Mr. Speaker, if you talk about the nature of adultery, that is a family issue, and therefore we think it is okay, Mr. Speaker, that there is a consequence, there is a repercussion to the family relationship. For example, the divorce of couples and so on and so forth, Mr. Speaker. And also, since they are public figures, Mr. Speaker, in contrast to the private individuals, we think it is okay that those things are known to the public because they are benefiting from the publicity, as Alex explained, Mr. Speaker. But the crucial thing is it so wrong, or is the punishment proportionate when those people are effectively evicted from the showbiz world, Mr. Speaker, which they have been devoted to for the past, for example, 10 years or 20 years, Mr. Speaker, lost of a job based on the family issue, which is not considered as reprehensible by the society consensus or by the law, Mr. Speaker. And that is the thing, that is the reason why, although we accept the premise that there might be some different situations between private individuals and public figures, the nature and degree of punishment which is given by the court of public opinion is disproportionate, and therefore it is unjust.
Comments?
No thanks. Importantly, what is totally missed by Alex is that, Mr. Speaker, the facts are not considered by the court of public opinions in contrast to the court of civil court or criminal court, Mr. Speaker. In the case of Nariya, it was entirely blurred whether or not he actually used cocaine, Mr. Speaker, but still, the suspicion in and of itself was harmful enough for him to be effectively evicted from the showbiz world, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, that is a crucial distinction. Even though you have not committed crime, or even though you have not committed anti-social act, you are evicted from the society due to the suspicion in and of itself. That is the crucial reason why the court of public opinion is unjust, even though we consider the different situations between private individuals and public figures. Now, Alex also talks about how adultery must be wrong when the society thinks it is wrong, Mr. Speaker. But the question is, although it might be wrong, is it so wrong to the extent that those people who engage in adultery, public figures who engage in adultery, deserve to lose a job, deserve to lose a social life, Mr. Speaker? As I say, it is a family issue, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that is proportionate. So, and also, he explained the court sometimes cannot function. For example, some people are found innocent, and therefore that is a necessity of court of public opinions. But if the court, which is made by the professional judges, thinks there is no sufficient evidence or ground to blame the person and give punishment, probably we should not punish the person because there is no factual ground on which we can attach blame to the person sit down opening government, Mr. Speaker. And also, Alex told us that an argument about the foreseeability does not stand because those people can foresee the punishment. But Mr. Speaker, the other important distinction in regards to this court of public opinion is that the punishment is not equal and not fair, Mr. Speaker, because it depends on things like popularity. For example, and even among AKB48, people for example, like Sashihara, Mr. Speaker, was not punished severely by the court of public opinion. Now she's number 1, number 2 in the AKB election, Mr. Speaker. But the other, for example, AKB members who broke the contractual requirements, which say you cannot have a boyfriend, were punished much more heavily, and therefore that arbitrary nature of court of public opinion is something unjust as well. So let me, sit down. So also the closing raised the point in POI, saying that why those opinions are one-sided necessarily. But we say that, Mr. Speaker, first of all, people basically use it as an outlet of stress, Mr. Speaker, because they can anonymously blame the person as opposed to, for example, criticizing the others in real life on face, Mr. Speaker. That is the reason why, because of anonymity on Twitter or other SNS, they have a unique reason to blame the person as opposed to supporting them. But furthermore, there's a comfort that the vast majority of society as a whole, Mr. Speaker, are on your side of blaming the person, and therefore, because of those natures, the public opinions tend to be one-sided. And furthermore, there is a unique disincentive not to criticize the person, Mr. Speaker, because if you start supporting the person, you are seen as someone who admits adultery, or someone who supports the use of drugs, and therefore that cannot generate support for those people. That's why it's one-sided. I'll take Shimo.
So why opening government have a burden to defend a collapse in disproportionate form of court of public opinion? And furthermore, what is the ground of disproportionality?
Okay, because that is the fundamental nature of the public opinions for all the reasons why we told you. And therefore you cannot defend hypothetical public court of opinion which does not exist in our society. Moving on to the next point, which is about the necessity of court of public opinion. Now, as for the PM's argument, I already gave you provided the response. What we say is that there is no necessity for court of public opinion which blames that person based on the act. We can criticize the act or statement in and of itself, Mr. Speaker. We don't have to go to the extent of criticizing the person, socially monitoring that person, in addition to criticizing their discriminatory source statement or discriminatory act. And that is a crucial distinction between discourse and the court of public opinion. As for Alex's argument, we don't, for example, discrimination can unite the society, Mr. Speaker, unite the majority, maybe, but that's not the reason to allow the discrimination, because that unity is gained at the cost of the most vulnerable individual. That's simply unjust. And also, we don't think morality should be generated in this way. The morality can be formed by the judgment of the court and public discourse attached to it. So finally, let's talk about the social impact, although Saika already told you. So, Mr. Speaker, we think that this is harmful to the society as well, because public are going to be desensitized. Public are going to be desensitized about blaming the person, because the structure is the same between, for example, cyberbullying or bullying in general and this court of public opinion. Basically, the majority have the comfort of anonymously blaming the person often, and also they feel the comfort that the majority are on their side, and therefore they can do whatever they want. That structure is exactly the same between bullying, especially the cyberbullying in general, and also court of public opinion. And therefore, the effect of the court of public opinion is not only limited to the public figures, but it goes beyond the extent to the level of ordinary individual. For example, someone who are in a vulnerable position in a classroom or any other community, Mr. Speaker. That is why at the social level we think this is also unjust. Although what we told you is that there is no necessity of having court of public opinions. Furthermore, there is enormous harm which cannot be condoned. And furthermore, we think it has a broad and general social effect. For all of those reasons, we are extremely proud of those.
Thank you, Deputy Leader Petition, for your remarks. Next, we'd like to move on to the closing half. First of all, we'd like to call upon the member of the government, Shikara Mizukami from Tokyo 8.
Hello. The opposition premise so far is that systems of work, laws are perfect, probably bad guys will be scrutinized, probably by the existence of systems. Reality is not the case, because many abuses by corporations or rich people are existent because of loopholes of law, because of lack of application, and the only moment that those loopholes are identified and solved is when bashing a court. When bashing and the outrage of people formed the critical mass that were able to stop these corporations from doing these sort of abuses like child labor or maybe oil spill by BP, and were able to create new laws to progress our society, form those sort of perfection of that framework. What we tell you from closing garment is that the court of public opinion is necessary to bring justice to those where laws do not exist, and also to create laws and what we're going to talk about. Because essentially, opposition was really unclear about what their rules are. Probably assuming that they would be tolerant about these sort of things, that there will be no bashing, that people will not be heated up, and there will not be a continuation of discussion. That means that people will not be so interested. People will not really rally and care about the issue, and we will not able to have people striving and standing up and creating critical mass and pressure for politicians and society to be able to create pressure for changing a law. But further, the continuation of discussion will be non-existent. That means that accumulation of pressure and a crystallization of laws or those sort of things will be impossible on that side of the house. 2 points of extension. Firstly, on why this court uniquely prevents abuses and injustices perpetrated by individuals who are able to exploit the loopholes in law, and we create those laws to prevent those loopholes in the future. Secondly, on why the public court can improve the situation and why they are also just. And rebuttals were integrated. So, once again, Ops premise is that laws do work, reality simply is not the case. Because 90s child labor wasn't punished. It was only punished when people were able to identify it, people really bashed it, and then laws were created and future uses probably were decreased. BP oil spill, other exploitations that happened unfortunately in Japan in many contexts like the Third World, only improved when it was identified, people bashed it, and then laws created later. Even if laws existed, no thank you, it was that laws were not applied properly. Corruption, the non-existence of the executive branch of the government, proves the fact that abuses often existing in third world countries simply were not even solved. That they existed, were not able to get out of it. Rich people evading taxes, rich people just getting greedy profit, simply were able to get away with it because these laws were not applied. When people, the journalists, the NGOs were able to identify it, when people bashed it, we are able to boycott these specific individuals and corporations and stop them immediately. But furthermore, in the future, we are able to create laws that prevent those sort of loopholes and prevent future individuals from exploiting that sort of thing and harming individuals in our society. That is very important because politicians cannot create these little frameworks in the absence of these public courts. But I have to understand that politicians are busy with their daily issues of diplomacy, economy, and for the other issues like these specific issues to come up and rise, they have to be very clear and be concerned that the people are rising. People are angry. People are so shouting that they are bashing specific individuals excessively. That's why laws are created. That's why they're concerned. And that's a critical mass and outrage is necessary for any attention by the politician to be formed. But further, looking at the reality of these people that are abusing that loophole, it is rich individuals who have more ties with these politicians. Rich corporations who are able to abuse laws like Citizens United and just pressure these politicians to not be able to function. That is why a critical mass that is so strong that politicians would have to be considered, even though the pressure is necessary for any change to happen. But further, even if those legal changes were impossible, it is important that people boycott it, condemn these people, and are able to stop these people even in the non-existence of law, and that will be able to prevent human rights abuse or problems that our moral conscience would deny. Sure.
So we're happy to have a discussion of adultery and controversial things, right? What you need to prove is why it must be in the form of bashing one person.
That's going to be my second step, Dante. But no, but okay. So, and that's where we think that they do have harms of really disproportionate punishment. That is probably less important than the systemic ability of democracy to function and our ability to create framework and pressure for abuses or those sort of things that are probably more important than celebrities' rights at stake to be able to be stopped and be prevented in the future. But conceding to their importance, let's go on to the second extension. That the argument is that it's probably disproportionate, so it's bad. We say that this debate isn't about, this debate is about whether it should exist and non-exist. And saying that the status quo is bad isn't necessarily relevant to the motion. What we say is that the situation is improving. They are guardians, defenders of those who are bad. Like Obokata, also there were numerous articles used individuals rather defending Obokata because bashing was going too far. There were people sending letters to Obokata that they are with them. There are articles created for that Obokata should be protected, things like that. And the fact that we have this motion right now proves the fact that we're aware that things were going too far and we're learning that the bashing should not go too far. And even if there are people who are bashing right already, we're able to bash those people who are going too far, and that's a preventative measure that we established. But furthermore, even if we concede that unfortunate reality of bashing do exist, that's not comparative. Firstly, we need to understand the most vicious bashing is done not by the general public, but more rather specific geeks or people in the places like Me Channel or fans that are really dismayed. These people rather know these addresses, have so much affecting people, and that's why they do the most violent things and bash them in the most terrible way. Not just words that you wouldn't be able to see on Twitter, but they rather attack houses, go into places that they have, and that sort of thing crossing is probably more like problematic to these individuals, so they miss the comparative. And it's rather they stop these crazy guys when the public comes later and they're able to condemn them, and that's when you restore the justice for these people, that these mobs would exist regardless of their heart, regardless of this policy, and that's the most arbitrary thing. But secondly, once again, the argument, celebrities. Why is that more important than the first substantive we provided you? Because we're talking about the entirety of a system existing, entirety of being tax being taken away that should go to the welfare of poor people. We're talking about people who are being killed because proper legal labor laws do not exist. We're talking about environmental pollution that determines the lives of people, and that's probably more important than the things that they can ever provide on opposition. But further, we tell you that there is justice at stake. That justice isn't about legal framework. It is also about people's anger, retribution. And that retributional aspect is often neglected by the legal system, by professional elites. That is important because laws are created by people and it is for them. And to the extent that the legal system itself cannot consider that nuance of justice, people have a right to reclaim that nuance of justice and bring justice. And essentially, this form of justice is important but disproportionate. So essentially, it's something that is disproportionate but is important. But also, that pressure improves law. Like Japan, the drunken driving law in Japan only was improved when public pressure and condemnation that went too far was created. And that's why we think that justice is only achieved, you prevent those abuses only in our house. We are proud to provoke.
Thank you, member of the government, for your remarks. Next, we want to invite member of the opposition, Ryota Kosuge from Nakanishi.
Reason why we are here is because I have brought up a creative extension throughout this tournament. That's why I'm going to provide a creative extension which is important for this debate, and I'm going to talk to you about I'm going to talk to you about how society looks like under the society that we are going to support. We believe that this society, like chilling effect, that prevents people from engaging with the vigorous activities that necessarily harms and kills the social innovations and creative destruction. But before that, let's engage with a couple of stuff that we heard from closing government. I think this is a very different characterization of the how, like, what was that, like court of public opinion works, right? Because they are specifically targeting the very big and huge corporations, whereas what we are talking in the opening half was the level of individual. So let's compare which is more likely in the context, because they are defending a very different court of public opinion. We tell you that the specific targeting specific individual is more likely, and that's relevant in this debate, because we tell you that the large corporations are able to have a tie with the media corporation, like they are able to buy up the shares of these media corporations, which means that they are able to ferment those like hatred toward these specific individuals, rather than focusing on the vast like huge corporations like Toyota or something like that. We tell you that's why we are like a context or like characterization of the public opinion specific target is something that's relevant in opening half. That's why closing government, like 3 times I'm going to defeat the closing government in this debate. So what are we going to talk to you about how society will look like? Because the lack of explanation coming from opening government was the idea that how society looks like, because this motion specifically requires the debate or talk about how society looks like and why we have to prefer those involved at the end of the day. That's why, like, legitimacy argument simply, I don't know why they brought up, because I don't think that's prefer, or I think it's relevant for the preferring society in the first place. That's why I'm going to illustrate how society looks like. We tell you that kills and creates a chilling effect for people to engage with the innovative activity, which is really focusing on the vigorous activities or social innovations. I personally hate the discourse argument prevalent in debating community, because discourse doesn't change anything. Look at, for example, like criticism toward the judge, like quality. But still, we have a problem of unqualified judges everywhere. I'm not offensive to you guys. That's why the activity or practice discourse doesn't change society or forward that society in the first place, but vigorous activity and engagement to the real practices is more important in comparison. That's why, thank you, how society will be killed in its mobility under their side of the house on 3 levels of analysis. Firstly, because the individuals are public animals, because they have to care about the social reputation and they have to have a social interaction, and therefore they only look they oftentimes look at how society responds to your actions all the time. That. In the second level, we tell you that morality is something that is unstable in comparison to the existing law, right? Because we are not able to be perfectly sure what morality stands for and what kind of moral actions that they are going to criticize in the first place. That's why we tell you that it's an unclear standard that are going to be imposed on the individuals, and people are not able to know what is going to be criticized at the end of the day. So thirdly, the third level we tell you is that the consequence of human beings. Because we tell you that human beings are not going to engage with a very controversial activities under their side of the house, because it prevents people, because otherwise that people see the precedents that people are severely criticized, like for example Becky, the opening government talk to you, or all of justice criticized in the aftermath of the activity in this year. So that's why most of the people simply stop engage with a creative and an innovative activity, in the first place. Why under our side we are able to guarantee the creative disruptions and the vigorous social activities? Because we tell you that innovation often requires a challenge in the conventional framework of morality. Because for example, in order to establish AIs, you have to challenge the norms that people should engage with a job or certain things, right? We tell you, for example, that's why, for example, kills the development of